Hello, today what I'd like to do is take a tour of the periodic table starting at element number 1, going all the way through element number 118. Now remember, everything you've ever touched, everything you've ever tasted, every substance that you've ever interacted with is made up of matter. And it was one of the greatest discoveries, in my opinion, in all of human history, that all of the different character of substances that you interact with on a daily basis are really not all that different and actually only made up of about 100 or so of these smaller building blocks that nowadays we call atoms or elements on the periodic table. Think about water, something you interact with every day. Obviously, it's cool, it's refreshing, it's wet. At room temperature, it's a liquid. But once upon a time, humans actually thought that water was its own unique fundamental substance. But now we know that water is really made up of smaller building blocks. Nowadays, we call them atoms or elements on the periodic table. Specifically for water, it's hydrogen and oxygen, which are atoms that are bound into a larger structure called a molecule of 2 atoms of hydrogen for 1 atom of oxygen. And whenever you do that, the character of water is totally different than the character of the hydrogen and the oxygen that make it up. So what I wanted to do today, I thought it'd be kind of fun and educational for me as well, to take a minute and go through the entire periodic table, starting with element number 1 and ending up with element number 118, and take just a couple seconds on each element to discuss what the material is, some notable or maybe interesting characteristics. If there's some interesting historical story behind it, maybe we'll chat about that for a second and talk about maybe what it looks like. After all, everything you've ever touched is made up of these things, so let's learn a little bit about them. All right, here we go. Let's get started with element number 1. That's hydrogen, the most abundant element in the universe. That's its notable claim to fame, in my opinion. Hydrogen actually powers our sun through nuclear fusion, releasing energy. Now, here's an interesting fact. Despite being placed above the alkali metals on the left-hand side of the periodic table, hydrogen isn't actually a metal. It's in a class all by itself. Hydrogen is just a little bit weird, sometimes acting as a metal and sometimes acting as a non-metal. Element number 2, we call it helium. Now, this was first discovered in the sun's spectrum from the light before being found on Earth. Hence its name Helios, coming from the word helios, which means sun. Now, here's a fun fact. The world's helium supplies are actually running low, and once it's released into the atmosphere, it escapes into space because it's so light and so hard to hold on to. Next, we come to element number 3. We call it lithium. So this is essential for rechargeable batteries and also for treating bipolar disorder. Here's an interesting fact. All lithium on Earth was actually created after the first few minutes after the Big Bang. We have the element beryllium. It's used in emeralds and also in aerospace components. I know that they had beryllium brakes on the space shuttle, for instance, back in the day, and it's due to its lightweight strength. Despite its toxicity, it's actually essential in X-ray machines, where its transparency to X-rays is actually really important for those situations. Element number 5, we have boron. Now, this is found in every eye drop that contains boric acid, and it's essential for plant growth. Now, here's an interesting fact. Boron-based compounds are actually used in bulletproof vests and also in armor for tanks. Here we come to number 6, the very familiar carbon. So this is the backbone of all known life, at least on Earth. Carbon can form up to 10 million different known compounds. That's based on the way it bonds with other carbon atoms and other things. Now, here's an interesting fact. A diamond and the graphite in your pencil are both pure carbon, just arranged differently down at the atomic level. Here's element number 7, we call it nitrogen. It makes up a whopping 78% of the Earth's atmosphere. It's actually crucial for amino acids. You see nitrogen's running around all over the molecular structure of amino acids. So here's a fun fact. Liquid nitrogen's extreme cold is actually used to flash freeze foods and preserve biological samples. Element number 8, you probably heard of it. It's called oxygen. It's essential for most life, and it makes up about 65% of the human body by mass. Don't forget, oxygen isn't just a gas. It's bound up in all other molecules, lots of other molecules as well. Here's a fun fact. Oxygen isn't always good. It actually causes metal to rust and wine to turn into vinegar. Element number 9 is called fluorine. It's the most reactive non-metal, and it can form compounds with most elements. Even some noble gases, which normally doesn't react with anything at all, can actually react with fluorine. So early researchers studying fluorine often died or were severely injured, earning it the nickname the Tiger of Chemistry. Here's another one you've almost certainly heard of, element number 10, called neon. It's famous for its use in signs that glow up in these nice colors, right? But neon was first discovered when William Ramsay and Morris Tavers literally froze air until it liquefied, and then it separated the components of the air. Now, though we associate neon with the red signs, pure neon is actually glowing orange. The red colors actually come from other gases which are usually in the mixture with the neon in those signs. Element number 11 you've certainly heard of. It's called sodium. It's actually essential for nerve function in ion channels and nerve triggering, but actually forms the basis of something super common called table salt, sodium chloride. So you eat it all the time. Here's a fun fact. Pure sodium is so reactive that it explodes on contact with water, and it has to be stored in oil in order to prevent it from reacting with the water that's in the air. And basically that happens because sodium has an electron in the outer shell that's very loosely bound, doesn't hold on to it well, and that's why it's so reactive. Element number 12, magnesium. It's found in chlorophyll, making it crucial for photosynthesis and plant life. Here's a fun fact. Magnesium powder was used in early photography flash bulbs, producing an intense bright white light. Actually, don't do this at home. Maybe I'll do it one day. But if you take a ribbon of magnesium metal and light it with a high enough temperature, it actually burns and combines with the oxygen, producing that intense white light with that pure magnesium metal burning. Here's element number 13, aluminum, of aluminum foil fame. The most abundant metal in the Earth's crust, but it wasn't actually isolated until the 1820s. Here's a cool fact. Napoleon III served his most honored guest with aluminum utensils, while the less favored guest actually used gold. Aluminum was once more valuable than gold. Now here's one you've absolutely heard of, number 14. It's called silicon. So this is the backbone of the computer industry and the second most abundant element in the Earth's crust. Here's a fun fact. Every grain of sand on Earth contains silicon, and without it, we wouldn't have modern electronics or glass. Silicon has a whole host of interesting properties. It's called a semiconductor, kind of has properties of a conductor and properties of an insulator, and that allows us to build things called transistors, which is the basis of all of our modern computer chips. Element number 15, probably heard of, called phosphorus. So it's actually essential for DNA, ATP, that's adenosine triphosphate, that's the energy molecule in the body, and bone structure. Here's a bizarre discovery fact. It was first isolated from urine by an alchemist that was actually searching for the Philosopher's Stone, who noticed it while glowing in the dark. Number 16, stinky sulfur has a bad rap. Sulfur, known since ancient times as brimstone. It's crucial for vulcanizing rubber. Here's an interesting fact. Some bacteria actually use sulfur instead of oxygen for their energy production. They actually thrive in these hot springs and deep sea vents. You've probably seen pictures from Yellowstone of these beautiful, weird colored hot springs and things. Very often there's lots of sulfur compounds coming out of the earth populating those things. And when they found life, very primitive, weird life in some of those inhospitable areas, it was a huge discovery. Element 17, you've heard of chlorine. It's used in water purification to keep our water clean, and also, of course, table salt, sodium chloride, it's in there as well. Here's an interesting fact. Chlorine was actually the first chemical weapon used in World War I, leading to the development of chemical warfare. And it's kind of a sad fact in my opinion, but that's a true fact. Here's element number 18 called argon. It makes up about 1% of Earth's atmosphere, and it's used in light bulbs and also in welding. So here's a fun fact. The name of argon comes from the Greek, which means lazy or inactive because it hardly reacts with anything. Actually, all of the gases on the right side of the periodic table, of which argon is one of them, they don't really react with anything because the electrons are very tightly held to the nucleus in their shells for those atoms. One of my favorites, element 19, it's called potassium. It's critical for heart and muscle function, and it gets its symbol, which on the periodic table is the letter K from the Latin kalium. Now here's an interesting fact. Bananas are famously high in potassium, but potatoes actually contain more per serving. Now potassium violently reacts with water, causing a production of hydrogen gas, usually exploding on contact with water, again because the outer electron of potassium is so weakly held on, it can donate it in chemical reactions. Element 20, we call it calcium. Beyond building bones and teeth, calcium is actually vital for muscle contraction and nerve signaling. Here's a fun fact about calcium. Calcium compounds create the bright red color in fireworks, those brilliant red colors, and limestone caves are formed by calcium carbonate dissolving in slightly acidic groundwater. Here's element 21, a weird one called scandium. So it's a rare earth element that makes aluminum alloy stronger and lighter. Remember, an alloy is when you mix more than one element or metal together, usually to create something tougher or with different characteristics. Now, though it was discovered in Scandinavia, it's actually more abundant in the moon's crust than in the Earth's crust. Now here's a cool one, element number 22, it's called titanium. It's known for its incredible strength to weight ratio and for its corrosion resistance. Here's a cool fact, the airplane, the SR-71 Blackbird spy plane, was made of titanium that the CIA secretly bought from the Soviet Union during the Cold War. And if you ever go camping for backpacking, you get those very lightweight cups and spoons made of titanium. They are incredibly feather light, but incredibly strong. Here's element 23, it's called vanadium. It's essential for some sea creatures, and it also adds incredible strength to steel. Here's an interesting fact about vanadium. It was discovered twice, actually. First in Mexico, and then again in Sweden, and it's actually named after Vanadis, the Norse goddess of beauty, due to its colorful compounds. You probably heard of this one, element 24, called chromium. So it gives stainless steel its shine and its resistance to tarnishing. So the interesting thing here is the red color of rubies actually comes from chromium impurities in the aluminum oxide crystals. Actually, that's an interesting fun fact all by itself. A lot of the crystals that we prize so much for their beautiful colors is oftentimes coming from a single atom or very small amount of atoms as impurities in the crystal lattice of something else. Here we go with element 25. It's called manganese. It's essential for photosynthesis and for the production of steel. So manganese nodules litter some parts of the ocean floor, leading potential deep sea mining prospects to get more of it from the ocean floor. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that you've heard of element 26. It's called iron. It's the most abundant element on Earth by mass, and it's crucial for the hemoglobin in blood. So here's an interesting historical fact about iron. The Iron Age, probably heard of, actually revolutionized human civilization, but ancient Egyptians actually called it metal from heaven because their first iron actually came from meteorites, and we're still finding iron in meteorites every year on Earth. Element 27 is called cobalt. It gives vivid blue colors to glass and also to ceramics, and it's essential for vitamin B12, so you really do need it. Here's an interesting fact. Cobalt, the name, comes from the word kobold, which means goblin, because miners actually thought goblins had cursed the ore when it released toxic arsenic fumes during smelting. Element 28, probably heard of nickel. It's essential for many rechargeable batteries, and it's found in the Earth's core. Here's a fun fact. The US nickel, the 5-cent piece, is actually called a nickel, but it's only about 25% nickel today. It was once pure nickel during wartime. Element 29 is called copper. You probably heard of that. One of the first metals used by humans, and it's crucial for electrical wiring. Has a low electrical resistance because of all the free electrons in the outer shell of the copper atom. Here's a historical fun fact. Ancient Egyptians actually used copper pipes for plumbing that are still functioning today over 5,000 years later. Element number 30, it's called zinc. It's essential for immune system function. You can take your zinc vitamins, and it protects steel from rust through something called galvanization. Here's something interesting. Zinc oxide was first called the philosopher's wool by alchemists because of the fluffy white powder that forms when zinc burns. Element number 31 is actually one of my favorites. I'll probably do a video just on this, and it's the element gallium. It's a metal that actually melts in your hand at about 85.6 degrees. Here's a fun fact. It's a popular science demo to make spoons out of gallium, and you form it into the shape of a spoon, and when you stir a hot liquid like tea or something, the spoon basically melts and disappears. Element number 32, it's called germanium. It's key to the development of the first transistor and the electronics revolution. Here's something I think is interesting. The existence of this element was predicted by Mendeleev before it was actually discovered, and he called it ecosilicon. Element 33 you've almost certainly heard of. It's called arsenic. It's of course famous as a poison in murder mysteries, but it's also essential for semiconductor manufacturing. That's transistors, diodes, computer chips, all sorts of modern technology. Here's a fun fact. Some bacteria can actually use arsenic instead of phosphorus in their DNA, which challenges, honestly, our understanding of life's requirements. Element 34, it's called selenium. Essential trace element for humans and used in photocopiers. Now here's a fun fact. It was discovered as a red residue in sulfuric acid chambers, and it was named after the moon, Selene, to complement tellurium, which is actually named after the Earth. Element number 35, again, one of my favorites, bromine. It's a liquid at room temperature, but it has an eerie red color. It looks kind of weird. Here's a historical fact. It was first isolated actually from seaweed ashes, believe it or not, and its name comes from the Greek word stench due to its horrible smell. This probably is my favorite element on the periodic table. It's number 36. It's called krypton. It's a noble gas which is used in high-performance light bulbs. Here's an interesting fact. While Superman's weakness, kryptonite, is fictional, real krypton is actually used to detect nuclear weapons testing. Why is it my favorite element? Honestly, because Superman came from the planet Krypton. Element number 37, it's called rubidium. It's so reactive that it can ignite spontaneously in air without any flame or anything else, just reacts and it can ignite spontaneously, and it actually literally explodes if you put it in water. Interesting fact is it's used in atomic clocks, and it gets its name from the Latin word for deep red due to its spectral lines. Element 38 is called strontium. It creates the bright red colors in fireworks. Now here's what I would call a sobering fact. Strontium-90 is an isotope from nuclear testing, and it can replace calcium in bones, and that leads to serious health concerns. Element 39, the underrated yttrium, single letter Y for its chemical symbol. It makes red phosphors in TV screens, and it's used in cancer treatments. Here's a couple interesting facts. It was discovered by a Swedish village called Ytterby. That's what it's named after, and it has 4 elements named after it. Here's another interesting fact. It's one of the elements in the first high-temperature superconductor, yttrium, barium, copper oxide. You probably heard of element 40 called zirconium. It's actually used in nuclear reactors and also in fake diamonds. So you hear of cubic zirconia. Here's a fun fact. It's so resistant to corrosion that it's used in surgical implants and chemical processing equipment. This brings us to element 41, niobium. It actually makes steel stronger, and it's superconductive at low temperatures, all by itself. Here's a historical fact. It was originally called columbium in America, and both names were used all the way up until 1949. Now we're up to element 42. We have molybdenum. It's essential for most living organisms, and it strengthens steel. Here's a fun fact. It's crucial for nitrogen fixation in plants and was once confused with lead ore, leading to its name, which actually means lead-like. Element number 43, technetium. It's the first artificially produced element. It doesn't occur naturally on Earth. Medical fact, which is interesting to me, it's the most commonly used element in nuclear medicine diagnosis. Now we start to get up into the elements that most of us don't have exposure to on an everyday basis. For instance, element number 44 here, ruthenium. It's used in electronic resistors and also in solar cells, solar panels. Here's a fun fact. It can form a unique compound that can fix nitrogen at room temperature, potentially revolutionizing fertilizer production. And as you might guess, fertilizer is pretty important for growing food. Element number 45 is called rhodium. It's often more expensive than gold, and it's actually used in catalytic converters for internal combustion engine vehicles. Here's a fun fact. It's so reflective that it doesn't need protective coatings to prevent any tarnishing. Right next door is element number 46, palladium, which is also essential for catalytic converters in engines and also in hydrogen storage. Here's a fun fact. It can absorb up to 900 times its own volume in hydrogen, which makes it really useful for hydrogen fuel cells and hydrogen storage. You probably heard of element 47. It's actually silver. It's the best electrical conductor of any element, and historically it's used as currency. Now here's a medical fact. Silver nanoparticles are increasingly used in medical applications due to their antimicrobial properties. Now we get to element 48, cadmium. Once common in rechargeable batteries but phased out due to its toxicity, here's a historical fact. It was discovered as an impurity in zinc carbonate, which was used to treat metal corrosion. Element number 49, one of my favorites, is called indium. Really cool element. It's actually used in touchscreens and also flat panel displays. Here's a cool fact. When you bend it, indium makes a unique crying sound called tin cry, even though it's not related to tin. Congratulations, you've made it to element 50, almost halfway through the periodic table with the element 10. It's used in solder, in electronics, to make circuit board traces, and also in food preservation. Now, 10 buttons on Napoleon soldiers' coats allegedly disintegrated in the extreme cold of the Russian winter, contributing to their defeat. Element 51, called antimony. It's used in flame retardants, and also ancient Egyptians used it for eye makeup. Here's a fun fact. Its chemical symbol, Sb, comes from the Latin name stibium, and it was used to treat parasitic infections until modern medicines were developed much later. Here's element 52, it's called tellurium. It's used in solar panels and rewritable CDs and DVDs, and an interesting fact is when metabolized by bacteria, it actually produces a garlic-like smell that can be detected on a person's breath. Now, you've certainly heard of element 53, it's called iodine. It's essential for thyroid functions, which is an essential gland in your body, and it's used also as an antiseptic to keep things clean when you get cuts or surgery. Here's a fun historical fact. It was discovered actually accidentally when seaweed ash was treated with sulfuric acid, producing beautiful purple vapors. Element 54 is called xenon. It's used in camera flashes and also, believe it or not, ion propulsion in spacecraft. It's used as an anesthetic in some countries and the first noble gas found to form true chemical compounds. Element 55 is called cesium. It's actually used in atomic clocks, and it's the most reactive metal that there is. Here's a fun fact. It's liquid at room temperature, but it also explodes on contact with water even more violently than the lighter cousins on the periodic table, such as sodium. Element number 56 is called barium. It's used in X-ray imaging of the digestive system. Here's a fun fact. Despite its toxicity, patients actually drink barium sulfate from medical imaging because this particular compound doesn't dissolve in the human body. Now we get to element 57 called lanthanum. It's used in camera lenses and also in hybrid car batteries. Here's a fun fact. It's used in studio lighting for the movie industry because it closely mimics natural sunlight. Now we have element 58 called cerium. It's used in self-cleaning ovens and also in lighter flints. Now here's a fun fact. It's the most abundant rare earth element, making up about 0.0046% of the Earth's crust. Now we come to element 59, praseodymium. It creates yellow safety glasses for glass blowers. And here's an interesting fact. Its name means green twin in the Greek, though the element itself isn't actually green. Here's a cool one. Element number 60 is called neodymium. It makes the strongest permanent magnets known. Here's a cool fact. These magnets are so strong that two small magnets can pinch skin hard enough to cause bleeding. And actually, they make these really large neodymium magnets that are so powerful that if your hand got caught between them, it would literally crush your hand. Now we have element 61. It's called promethium. It's the only naturally radioactive lanthanide. Here's a fun fact. Only about 500 or 600 grams of promethium actually exist in Earth's crust at any given time due to its radioactive decay. Next we have element 62. It's called samarium. It's used in magnets that can operate at high temperatures. Here's a fun fact. It was discovered in a mineral called samarskite, named after a Russian mine official. All right, that leads us to element 63 called europium. Now this one creates the red color in TV screens and also anti-forgery marks in euro banknotes. Here's a fun fact. It's the softest and most reactive of the rare earth elements. Next up is element 64. It's gadolinium. It's used as a contrast agent in MRI scans. Here's a fun fact. It has a unique magnetic property that makes it valuable for studying magnetic refrigeration. Element 65 is called terbium. It creates the green phosphors in TV screens and fluorescent lamps. Here's a fun fact. Another element discovered in the famous Ytterby mine in Sweden. Element 66 is dysprosium that's used in hard disk drives and compact disks. Here's a cool fact. Its name means hard to get at in Greek due to the difficulty of separating it from the other rare earth elements. Next up is element 67, holmium. It has the strongest magnetic properties of any natural element. Here's a fun fact. It's also used to create the strongest artificially generated magnetic fields. Next is element 68. It's called erbium, and it's used to amplify signals in fiber optic cables. Now here's something interesting. It adds a pink color to glass, and it's used in sunglasses and decorative glass. Element 69, it's thulium. It's the rarest naturally occurring lanthanide. Fun fact, it's used in portable X-ray devices, and it gets its name from Thule, the ancient name for Scandinavia. Next up is element 70, which is ytterbium, and that's used in atomic clocks and also in strengthening steel. Here's a fun fact. When under extreme pressure, this element becomes a semiconductor instead of a metal. Next is element 71, lutetium. It's used in petroleum cracking catalyst. Here's a fun fact. It's the heaviest and last of the lanthanides, and it was the last naturally occurring lanthanide to be discovered. Element 72, hafnium. It's used in nuclear reactor control rods. Fun fact, it's almost always found with zirconium and wasn't discovered until 1923, despite hafnium being present in every zirconium mineral ever discovered. Next up we have tantalum. It's element 73 and it's used in surgical implants due to its non-reactivity with bodily fluids. On the historical side, it was named after the Greek mythological figure Tantalus because it was tantalized by acids that couldn't dissolve it. Now, element 74 is tungsten. You certainly have everyday experience with tungsten, even though you might not realize it. It has the highest melting point of any element. Here's a fact. Its name comes from the Swedish meaning heavy stone, but its symbol is W, which is from its other name, which is wolfram. Tungsten is used very, very significantly in light bulbs, incandescent light bulbs. It's the filament on the inside that most light bulbs are using. Element 75 is rhenium. It's the last stable element to be discovered in nature. Here's a fun fact. It's used in jet engines because it can withstand extreme temperatures. All right, we're up to element 76, osmium. It's the densest naturally occurring element. Here's a fun fact. Its name actually means smelly in Greek because its oxide has a really strong, unpleasant odor. Element 77 is called iridium, the most corrosion-resistant element and evidence of dinosaur extinction. Here's really something fascinating. A layer of iridium-rich clay at the KT boundary provides evidence for the asteroid impact that actually wiped out the dinosaurs. Now I know you've heard of element 78, it's called platinum. It's used in catalytic converters and chemotherapy drugs. Here's a historical fact: pre-Columbian Americans made artifacts from platinum, with Spanish conquistadors dismissed as worthless little silver, so they thought it was worth nothing originally. And then there's the famous element 79. We call it gold. It's been prized throughout all of human history for its beauty and its inertness, which means it doesn't really react with anything else. Here's a fun fact: all the gold ever mined would fit into a cube with sides of only 21 meters. Element 80 is a fascinating element. It's called mercury. It's the only metal that is liquid at room temperature on Earth. Interesting fact is that ancient Chinese emperors died trying to achieve immortality by drinking mercury. Now we know mercury is a really bad neurotoxin. Whether you drink it, it goes through your skin. If you inhale it, it's going to do bad things to your brain. Element 81 is called thallium, once used as rat poison and hair removal cream. Interesting fact is it's so toxic that it was dubbed the poisoner's poison because its symptoms resemble other common illnesses. Next up is element 82. It's called lead. Known since ancient times, but now known to be toxic, historical fact is that the fall of the Roman Empire has been partially attributed to actually lead poisoning from their water pipes and their wine sweeteners. Next up is element 83, called bismuth, or bismuth, usually called bismuth, the heaviest stable element. Fun fact, it forms beautiful stair-stepped cubic crystals that oxidize into rainbow colors that are quite beautiful. Element 84 is called polonium. It was actually discovered by Marie Curie and named after her native Poland. Here's a fun fact: 1 gram of polonium-210, that's an isotope of polonium, reaches a temperature of 500 degrees Celsius, that's over 900 degrees Fahrenheit, due to its intense radioactive decay. Element 85 is called astatine. It's the rarest naturally occurring element. Here's a fun fact: only about 1 teaspoon of astatine has ever existed on Earth throughout its entire history. Here comes element 86, called radon. You've probably heard of this one. It's a radioactive noble gas that can accumulate in basements. Here's a fun fact: it's the second leading cause of lung cancer after smoking. Next up is element 87, called francium. It's the most unstable of the first 101 elements. Now here's an interesting fact about francium. Less than 30 grams of this substance exists naturally on Earth at any given time. Element 88 I think is really interesting. It's called radium. It was actually once used as glow-in-the-dark for like glow-in-the-dark watches until the dangers of radioactivity were really fully understood. Now here's a historical fact: Marie Curie's research notebooks are still radioactive to this very day and will be for thousands of years due to her handling these radioactive materials. Element 89 is called actinium. It's so radioactive that it actually glows blue in the dark. Now here's a fun fact: 1 gram of actinium, or actinium, generates 10 watts of thermal energy from radioactive decay. Here comes element 90, called thorium. It's a potential nuclear fuel that's more abundant than uranium. Now here's a fun fact: it was named after Thor, the Norse god of thunder. Next up is element 91, protactinium. It's one of the scariest elements in the Earth's crust. Interesting fact, it was originally called brevium because of the short half-life of one of its isotopes. Everybody's family favorite of radioactive elements is number 92, called uranium. It's used in nuclear power and in nuclear weapons. Historical fact was that the first nuclear reactor was built under a football stadium at the University of Chicago. Next up is element 93. It's called neptunium. It was the first synthetic transuranium element ever discovered. Fun fact, it's produced as a byproduct in nuclear reactors and was named after, you guessed it, Neptune, as it follows uranium just after Neptune follows Uranus in the solar system. Next up, element 94. You've heard of it, you love it. It's called plutonium. It's a key element in nuclear weapons. Interesting fact, pure plutonium metal has a silvery appearance, but it actually tarnishes to olive green when exposed to air. Element 95 is called americium. Fun fact, it's used in smoke detectors, and every home with a smoke detector contains about 0.29 micrograms of an isotope of this element. Element 96 is called curium, and of course it's named after Marie and Pierre Curie. Here's a fun fact, it's so radioactive that it glows with an eerie blue-violet color in the dark. Element 97 is called berkelium, created at the University of California at Berkeley. Fun fact, only a few grams of this element have ever been produced. Element 98 is called californium. It's used to find oil and water layers in wells. Here's a fun fact, 1 gram of this element can emit 170 million neutrons per minute. Element 99 is called einsteinium. It's first discovered in debris from the first hydrogen bomb test. Interestingly, it was also kept secret for several years due to the Cold War. Finally, making progress, element 100 is called fermium. It's named after Enrico Fermi, a famous scientist that was involved heavily in quantum mechanics. It was also discovered in the debris from the first hydrogen bomb explosion. Element number 101 is called mendelevium, the first element that was synthesized 1 atom at a time. Fun fact, as you might have guessed, it was named after Dmitri Mendeleev, who created the periodic table of the elements. Element number 102 is called nobelium. It was named after Alfred Nobel of Nobel Prize fame, and its discovery was disputed between American, Swedish, and Soviet scientists. Element number 103 is called lawrencium. It's the last element in the actinide series. Fun fact, only a few atoms of this element have ever been produced. Now we're up to element 104, rutherfordium, the first transactinide element. Historical fact, its discovery sparked a naming controversy between American and Soviet scientists that lasted for decades. Element number 105 is called dubnium. It's named after the Russian Research Center in Dubna. Fun fact, it was temporarily called unipentium, meaning 105 in Latin. Now we're up to element 106 called seaborgium. It's named after Glenn Seaborg while he was actually still alive. Now here's a fun fact, this broke the rule about not naming elements after living people. Element number 107 is called borium, named after Niels Bohr, one of the fathers of quantum mechanics. Here's a fun fact, only a few atoms of borium have ever been produced and observed. Element number 108 is called hafnium. It's named after the German state of Hesse. Interesting fact, despite its position on the periodic table, early experiments suggest it might be a gas at room temperature. Now, element number 109 is called meitnerium. It's named after Lise Meitner. Historical fact is that Meitner was overlooked for the Nobel Prize despite her crucial role in discovering nuclear fission. Element number 110 is called darmstadtium. It's named after Darmstadt, Germany. Fun fact, its most stable isotope has a half-life of only 4 seconds. Element number 111 is called roentgenium, named after Wilhelm Roentgen, discoverer of X-rays. Interesting fact is that it's actually predicted to be chemically similar to gold, though few atoms have ever existed. Element 112 is called copernicium, named after Nicolaus Copernicus. You probably heard of him. Fun fact, it's predicted to be a gas at room temperature, unlike its metallic neighbors. Element 113 is nihonium, first element discovered in an Asian country. Fun fact, the name comes from Nihon, meaning Japan. Element number 114, fluorovium. It may be surprisingly inert for its position on the periodic table. Fun fact, it's predicted to be more chemically stable than other elements in its group due to relativistic effects. In other words, effects predicted by the theory of relativity, usually involving how the electrons are moving in the orbitals. Element number 115, moscovium, named after the Moscow region, of course. Fun fact, all known isotopes have half-lives of less than 1 second. Element number 116 is called livermorium, named after the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. Here's a fun fact, only a few atoms have ever been created of livermorium. Element number 117, tennessine, named after the state of Tennessee. Fun fact, it's the second heaviest element yet created. Element number 118, oganesson, predicted to be a solid unlike other noble gases. Now here's an interesting fact. The heaviest known element, only about 5 atoms have ever been produced. It's named after Yuri Oganessian, who is still alive, making him only the second person to have an element named after him on the periodic table who is still alive. Thanks so much for hanging out with me, and specifically for staying all the way to the end. In my opinion, it really is one of the most amazing things to know that everything around you, no matter where you look, is made up of this really short list of building blocks. And remember, most of them are radioactive or just not naturally occurring, so it's really just a pretty short list of these atomic building blocks. So remember that as you go about your day and look at everything around you, always remember that everything comes from all of these elements, and always remember to stay curious. Learn anything at mathandscience.com.